Shabbat Shalom and happy Purim Yasharallah. Let's start off with a prayer. Heavenly Abba, high in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Todah, Heavenly Abba, for allowing us to be here in your presence, for appointing this day to be sanctified and setting us apart within it. Please give us rest, endurance, strength in these latter days, Abba. Push away anything that's not of you away from us and allow us to steadfast on your straight and narrow path. Please send the Ruach Kodesh to lead this message and to be the teacher. And thank you for allowing us to remember the days that you have always came through for your people. Bahashem Yasha. Amen. All right. Let's do this. We will be reading the full book of Esther. It is 10 chapters long, but it's not a long read, pretty easy read if you ask me. Alongside, you already know, we'll be using other scripture to highlight certain points. And also, we'll be using the Septuagint translation of the book of Esther, which has quite a bit more than you might expect. This is probably one of the most taken away books in the terms of information and scripture from the Septuagint that we're going to see to the Masoretic, which is your modern day translations such as the KJV and the Sefer. So we'll see quite a bit of the Septuagint translation in this book, and you'll see why. And I also want to add that this book is called Esther, but that's her pagan name. Her Hebrew name is Hadassah, if I'm saying that right, Hadassah, which we'll find in Esther chapter 2, verse 7. And before we get to reading, wanted to just go over the timeline here of what we're reading at. We see, I'll scroll up a little bit. So the days of the kings, we see Saul, David, Solomon, and then the division of the kingdom. All the way down, all the kings and prophets during this time. And then we have Nebuchadnezzar invades Judea in around 600 BC. And then roughly 100 years later, we have right here Esther and Mordecai. So the book of Esther is after the captivity of Babylon, as we see Daniel here, Babylonian captivity, but right before the book of Maccabees. Esther and Mordecai, we got Maccabees, if we scoot out here. Judas Maccabeus, Esther and Mordecai. So this is during the Persian captivity of the Israelites. All right. All that being said, we have the book of Esther, but we're starting out in the Septuagint. It has an intro that is not included in the modern day translation of the KJV, which is what we're going to be reading line by line. But we're going to start off with this introduction that gives more understanding to the passage of Esther in chapter 2, verse 21 and 23. So let's begin. In the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes, and we'll also see that these names are somewhat different. Ahasuerus is his name in the KJV. So just it's the same person here. All right. In the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes, the great king, on the first day of Abib, the first month of the year, Mordecai, the son of Harus, the son of Simeus, the son of Cesius, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Jew dwelling in the city of Susa, a great man serving in the king's palace, saw a vision. Now he was of the captivity which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried captive from Jerusalem with Jeconias, the king of Judea. And this was his dream. Behold, voices and a noise, thunders and earthquake, tumult upon the earth, and behold, two great serpents came forth, both ready for conflict. And there came from them a great voice, and by their voice every nation was prepared for battle, even to fight against the nation of the just. And behold, a day of darkness and blackness, tribulation and anguish, affliction and great tumult upon the earth, and all the righteous nation was troubled, fearing their own afflictions, and they prepared to die, and cried to Elohim. And from their cry there came, as it were, a great river from a little fountain, even much water, and light, and the sun arose, and the lowly were exalted, and devoured the honorable. And Mordecai, who had seen this vision and what Elohim designed to do, having awoke, kept it in his heart, and desired by all means to interpret it, even till night. And Mordecai rested quiet in the palace with Gabbatha, and Tharha, the king's two chamberlains, eunuchs who guarded the palace, and he heard their reasonings and searched out their plans, and learned that they were preparing to lay hands on King Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes, and he informed the king concerning them. And the king examined the two chamberlains, and they confessed and were executed. And the king wrote these things for a memorial. Also, Mordecai wrote concerning these matters. And the king commanded Mordecai to attend in the palace and gave him gifts from this service. This is saying what has already happened, but in the beginning of chapter 1, we're not to the point where Mordecai has been gifted for this service yet. And Haman, the son of Amadas, the Bugan, was honorable in the sight of the king, and he endeavored to hurt Mordecai and his people because of the two chamberlains of the king. So everything that we read about the vision, even talking about the two chamberlains, this is actually talking about the whole story of Purim. But it starts off, everything with this story starts off with the story with Mordecai finding out these two chamberlains was seeking to hurt the king and turning them in. Because without this story, which happens before everything in chapter 1, without it happening and the Most High giving him this vision to awaken him and to be in that position to hear them, it would miss out on the opportunity for the Most High to do his works and wonders when we get to reading in the book of Esther. So we will be referring back to this because it's pretty big point to this story. And like I said, all of this happened before chapter 1 begins, except the last part about the king gifting Mordecai. That comes later in Esther. All right, that being said, we are beginning at chapter 1, verse 1 in the book of Esther.
Esther, chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces, being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days, and when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver, upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Arbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Mares, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she hath not performed the commandment of King Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes, and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen. Thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people.
Well, even though this is a pagan king here, he's not lying. It's just focusing on the last verse here. Into every province, according to the writing thereof, into every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. Because that part, he got right. 1 Timothy 3:5. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of Elohim? So obviously, being a king, you have some pretty big responsibilities. And the idea of the message is scripture, that do not allow, which is the majority of the beginning of the chapter 1 of Esther is about, is the queen Vashti disregarding the commandment of the king. And then obviously this is what opens the door for Esther, aka Hadassah. And just pointing out some other points here, we have in verse 13, then the king said to the wise men which knew the times. Wise men knowing the times is knowing the luminaries. This is pretty consistent throughout scripture. We have the wise men in the story of the birth of Mashiach. And they were wise men because they knew the times and they observed the luminaries. Also in the book of Jasher, on the birth of Abraham, over and over again, you see these stories of wise men, and wise men know the times, which also is the luminaries. And yeah, that sums it up for chapter 1. All right, chapter 2. Let's begin.
Esther 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti, and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. And let the maiden, which pleaseth the king, be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter.
All right, let's do a just quick pause here. So we see in verse 7, he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther. So there you go, right there. We spoke about in the beginning of the reading, which is his uncle's daughter, which means they're cousins. So Hadassah, aka Esther, is Mordecai's cousin. And let me see here. At the end of verse 7, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter, took Esther to be his own daughter. We're going to read the same verse, verse 7 in the Septuagint here now. All right, verse 7. And he had a foster child, daughter of Aminadab, his father's brother, and her name was Esther. And when her parents were dead, he brought her up for a wife for himself, and the damsel was beautiful. So very interesting, pretty different, if you ask me, from these two translations here. We have took for his own daughter and brought her up for a wife for himself. But obviously, at this point, regardless of the translation, she is clearly still a virgin because the king was only coming to pursue versions of the land, and Esther was clearly one of them. But just to clarify, for scripture purposes, to understand, put things in perspective, that if Mordecai was to take her up for a wife, that's not against scripture. We have in Leviticus 18, some will be like, oh, well, she's your cousin. That's close to kin, as it reads in Leviticus 18:6. None of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. But this is the best thing about scripture, is that it doesn't allow you to interpret who is your close to kin. The next verses, but after that, tells you who is your close to kin. And we have to also put this in the time that they're in and they're in their days. If you couldn't marry your cousin, then that means you would have to go and marry outside of Israelite culture. Think about it. Everybody's your cousin. Everybody. Yeah, they could be your second, third, fourth cousin, but everyone's your cousin. Everyone's related at least to be cousins. So, especially if you have read the Torah, you understand that it was a very big deal who you marry, and that those people kept the laws of the land of the Israelites. Well, they're in captivity at this time, but I'm just saying Israelite culture, that you were going to be marrying your cousins. But everyone else outside of that, just summarizing who is the close kin, is your father's wife, your siblings, your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, your aunts, your uncles' wives, husbands, and your children. Just breaking all of this down in a nutshell. Those are who your close to kin is. Your initial family, not cousins. Cousins are outside of that because, like I said, think about it. The 12 sons of Jacob, all their children are cousins. And then all their children were going to be cousins. And then all their children is going to be cousins. And so just putting that in perspective, if you thought that was a red flag in the translation of Mordecai, bringing up Esther to be his wife. And if you think about it, they're in a land of captivity. I mean, was there another just man outside of the king? Well, the king obviously was going to just take the virgins of the land anyway. But I'm saying from Mordecai's perspective, to give Esther to at his time, probably not, maybe not. But either way, that is what it is. All right, now we're at verse 8. Let's continue.
So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not shown her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house, to know how Esther did, and what should become of her. Now when every maid's turn was come to go in to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Hegai the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head, and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces, and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet shown her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king.
All right, so here's the story, the introduction. In those days, right? So this was, like I said, important that he pretty much saved the king, and that it was written down in the book of the Chronicles before the king, that this will come into full understanding later in the story of Mordecai doing this deed. And then in verse 20, we're going to see in the Septuagint, there is so much that wasn't, for whatever reason, with the Masoretic translation, which we're reading up from in the KJV right here. They take out the Most High in so many different ways. And we're going to see the first one right here in verse 20, where it says, "For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai." Let's read that in the Septuagint, verse 20, chapter 2. "Now Esther had not discovered her kindred, for so Mordecai commanded her to fear the Most High and to perform his commandments." That's very different. Did the commandment of Mordecai? Really? Well, I guess what's the commandment of Mordecai? The commandment of Mordecai was to fear the Most High and perform his commandments. Sounds like Ecclesiastes 12:13. Sounds like Mordecai is on his scripture, right? "As when she was with him, and Esther changed not her manner of life." You see that there? This says, like as when she was brought up with him. No. To fear the Most High and to perform his commandments. Esther, throughout this entire time, changed not her manner of life. Woo! I will say that's very important perspective to understand while we are in captivity. Let's really think about that. Regardless of Mordecai and Esther being in the land they are in, dispersed in captivity, even with the circumstances that Esther is now in, where she's pretty much forced to be into being a maiden, to be purified, to do all of these deeds for the king, she still has not changed her manner of life. Keep that 100, Yasharala. No matter what you do in this land, in captivity, in the land of your enemy, you do the commandments and you fear the Most High. That does not change. All right. Chapter 3.
Esther 3. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman. For the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman, to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shown him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. In the first month, that is, the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, the lot before Haman from day to day, and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is, the month Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand, and gave it unto Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, The silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee.
All right. We're going to just read verses 7 through 11 in the Septuagint. Now, it reads a little bit different, has a little bit more context and detail, so why not? Let's move to the Septuagint. And he made a decree in the 12th year of the reign of Ahasuerus, Artaxerxes, and cast lots daily and monthly, to slay in one day the race of Mordecai. The lot fell on the 14th day of the month, which is Adar. This is the last month of the Hebrew calendar, the 12th month. And he spoke to King Artaxerxes, saying, There is a nation scattered among the nations in all thy kingdom, and their laws differ from those of all the other nations. And they disobey the laws of the king. And it is not expedient for the king to let them alone. If it seem good to the king, let him take a decree to destroy them. I will remit into the king's treasury 10,000 talents of silver. And the king took off his ring and gave it unto the hands of Haman, or Aman, to seal the decrees against the Jews. And the king said to Haman, Keep the silver and treat the nation as thou wilt. All right, so we're going to talk about this later on, of the meaning of Purim, but this is the baseline meaning of it here. Where is it at? As it was, it says it in the Masoretic. They cast pur. That is the lot before Haman from day to day, from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. So what is happening here? If you understand the idea of casting lots, even the Hebrews, Israelites, cast lots. The objective of casting a lot is saying that, well, let me explain casting a lot. That's like, for modern day interpretation, drawing straws. Or what they did, one of the ways is like they would have rocks, stones, and one stone would be different. And they will draw the stones. The same thing as drawing straws. One of the straws would be short. And so what they're doing Haman is doing is that he's probably asking his God to give him a sign on what day to cast for the lot to be casted, that he would draw the stone that is different. So that's what's happening here. They cast Pur, that is the lot before Haman, from day to day, from month to month, so he would see what day he would choose to annihilate the Jews. That's what Pur and Purim is from. It means to cast a lot. The day that the lot was pulled from, that was the different stone, the shorter straw, whichever way you want to do it, was the day that we are celebrating right now. It was a curse turned into a blessing. All right. Verse 12.
Then were the kings and scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The posts went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed.
Okay, so we see that this was sent out in the first month. So this was sent out ahead of time, and Haman casted the lot that told him, let's annihilate the Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month. So they sent out the letter in the first month to let all the provinces of the king know that in 12 months, well, technically 11, in the 12th month, we are going to annihilate all the Jews. So prep your mind and be battle ready for that day, which was the 13th of the 12th month. And then that in verse 13, and the letters were sent out by posts into all the king provinces. In the Septuagint, we have the letter that was sent out. So let's read it here. (13a) here. And the following is the copy of the letter. The great king Artaxerxes Ahasuerus writes thus to the rulers and inferior governors of 127 provinces, from India even to Ethiopia, who hold authority under him, ruling over many nations and having obtained dominion over the whole world. I was minded, not elated by the confidence of power, but ever conducting myself with great moderation and with gentleness, to make the lives of my subjects continually tranquil, desiring both to maintain the kingdom quiet and orderly to its utmost limits, and to restore the peace desired by all men. But when I had inquired of my counselors how this should be brought to pass, Haman, who excels in soundness of judgment among us, and has been manifestly well inclined without wavering and with unshaken fidelity, and has obtained the second post in the kingdom. I mean, you kind of tell who it was written by, right? informed us that a certain ill-disposed people is mixed up with all the tribes throughout the world, opposed in their laws to every other nation, and continually neglecting the commands of the king, so that the united government blamelessly administered by us is not quietly established, having then conceived that this nation alone of all others is continually set in opposition to every man, introducing as a change a foreign code of laws and injuriously plotting to accomplish the worst of evils against our interests and against the happy establishment of the monarchy. We have accordingly appointed those who are signified to you in the letters written by Haman, who is set over the public affairs and is our second governor, to destroy them all utterly with their wives and children by the swords of the enemies, without pitying or sparing any on the 14th day. That's another thing. The Masoretic has 13, this has 14, whichever, of the 12th month Adar of the present year, that the people aforetime and now ill disposed to us, having been violently consigned to death in one day, may hereafter secure to us continually as well constituted and quiet state of affairs. And this is a copy of the letter. And that will be all for chapter 3 of the book of Esther. Yes, a whole year. They wrote this in the first month, and the lot was pulled for it to happen on the 13th or 14th of the 12th month. And now we are in chapter 4. So now the plot is out there that Haman is coming to create a genocide against the Jews.
Esther 4. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes, and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai, and to take away his sackcloth from him. But he received it not. Then called Esther for Hatach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai, to know what it was and why it was. So Hatach went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king, to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. And Hatach came, and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again Esther spake unto Hatach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his, to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house, more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer: Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him.
Man, all right. So this whole chapter is Mordecai, he puts sackcloth with ashes on. He's crying out to Esther, letting her know that this is that serious and you are in a position to do something about it. And as in verse 14 says, who knoweth whether thou art come to a kingdom for such a time as this? And understand, Yasharallah, that the Most High can choose you to be in a certain position at a certain moment. And this is, top tier, being a queen going into a king. But this can go all the way down in any element, in any tier of life, just being in a moment of you're working at this job to talk to this individual. That you are anywhere, at any point, always be ready to fulfill your mission as being a disciple. As we're reading about with Esther, this is hyped up in a sense that, like, we look at it like, oh yeah, she's the queen, she has to do something, but there's a lot of more details in the smaller matters that goes on in our lives that we can say the same exact line to. Who knoweth whether thou art come and was born in this time, being around these certain people for a reason. Always these stories are not just written here for us to remember, but every story is advice. Every story is an example that can reflect on our lives. And we are in one hell of a time right now. And how we showcase the kingdom is very important. And what we say and how we conduct ourselves and being ready is all very important. And then in verse 16, the answer, this book has a lot of good scripture in it in the context of the story. Because when the times get tough, what does Esther say we need to do? Fast ye for me, neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also, my maidens, will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. That's what this life's about in a nutshell. If you haven't figured it out yet, is that you live and die on what we're supposed to be here doing. Guarding the commandments, and in this perspective, she's guarding the commandments for the whole house of Yasharallah, because as Mordecai states, there will be no father's house of your people. And so from the bigger matters, as what we're reading about, to the smaller ones, if I perish, then I perish, but I will perish doing the Most High's work. And the answer is always fasting and prayer. Matthew 17:21. Howbeit this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. Isaiah 58. Not this the fast that I have chosen. And remember, the fast that he has chosen. There is fast that you can do for vanity, for religion, for purposes to elevate oneself above another. Understand that he's talking about a specific fast, a fast of humbling, a fast of elevating the ruach, a fast of creating a thirst for our flesh, to make our flesh less, to loose the bands of the wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke. It's a beautiful thing that what this story is about. This story is not just about a woman being crowned queen and going to ask the king to help her people out. This story is about faith and following the instructions found in the book when times get hard. We ain't talking about the easy stuff. We ain't talking about that easy stuff. When times get hard, how will you show your faith? Everyone says they have faith until it's time to test it. This is what we're reading about right here. And if I perish, I perish. This is the epitome of walking in faith. But before she does that, she goes into fast in prayer. And let's read verse 17 in the Septuagint. All right, so this is Mordecai's. There it is. Yes, it's long. We have 17a here. So in the Masoretic, we see Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. And we see that right here, but this is the full understanding of what happened at this time. Let's read. This is, I believe, Mordecai's prayer, if I'm not mistaken. All right. And he besought the Adon, making mention of all the works of the Adon, and said, Hayah, king, ruler over all, for all things are in thy power, and there is no one that shall oppress thee in thy purpose to save Yasharallah. For thou has made the heaven and the earth, and every wonderful thing in the world under heaven, and thou art Adon of all, and there is no one who shall resist thee, the Lord. Thou knoweth all things. Thou knoweth Hayah, that is not in insolence or haughtiness, nor love of glory, that I have done this to refuse obedience to the haughty Haman. For I would gladly have kissed the soles of his feet for the safety of Yasharallah. But I have done this that I might not set the glory of man above the glory of Elohim. So he's obviously talking about heeding to the commands of the king to bow to Haman right here. So this is clearly Mordecai praying to the Most High here. And I will not worship anyone except thee, Hayah. I will not do these things in haughtiness. And now, O Adon Elohim, the king, the Elohim of Abraham, spare thy people, for our enemies are looking upon us to our destruction, and they have desired to destroy thy ancient inheritance. Do not overlook thy peculiar people, whom thou hast redeemed for thyself out of the land of Egypt. Hearken to my prayer, and be propitious to thy inheritance, and turn our mourning into gladness, that we may live and sing praise to thy name, O Hayah. And do not utterly destroy the mouth of them that praise thee, O Hayah. 17I. And all Yasharallah cried with all their might, for their death was before their eyes. And Queen Esther betook herself for refuge to the Adon, being taken as it were in the agony of death. And having taken off her glorious apparel, she put on the garments of distress and mourning. And instead of grand perfume, she filled her head with ashes and dung. And she greatly brought down her body, and she filled every place of her glad adoring with torn curls of her hair. She besought Hayah of Yasharallah and said, O my Adon, thou alone art our king. So I just want to say this real quick. We so much taken out of the book. We have a full prayer of Mordecai for it, just totally not in the Masoretic. And then now we're reading a full prayer of Esther. So, I mean, man, so much of the relationship with the Most High is in the Septuagint. Continuing though, O my Adon, thou alone art our king. Help me who am destitute and have no helper but thee, for my danger is near at hand. I have heard from my birth in the tribe of my kindred that thou, Adon, tooketh Yasharallah out of all the nations, and our fathers out of all their kindred for a perpetual inheritance, and has wrought for them all that thou hast said. And now we have sinned before thee, and thou hast delivered us into the hands of our enemies, because we honored their gods. Thou art righteous, O Adon. But now they have not been contented with the bitterness of our slavery, but have laid their hands on the hands of their idols, in order to abolish the decree of thy mouth, and utterly to destroy thine inheritance, and to stop the mouth of them that praise thee, and to extinguish the glory of thy house in thy altar, and to open the mouth of the Gentiles to speak the praises of vanities, and in order that a mortal king should be admired forever. O Adon, do not resign thy scepter to them that are not, and let them not laugh at our fall, but turn their counsel against themselves, and make examples of him who has begun to injure us. Remember us, O Hayah. Manifest thyself in the time of our affliction, and encourage me. O kings of Allahims and rulers of dominion, put harmonious speech unto my mouth before the lion, and turn his heart to hate him that fights against us, to the utter destruction of him and of them that consent with him. So this is obviously the time that she's going to go into the king to ask for help. But deliver us by thy hand, and help me who am destitute and have none but thee, O Adon. Thou knowest all things, and knowest that I hate the glory of transgressors, and that I abhor the couch of the uncircumcised, and of every stranger. Thou knowest my necessity, for I abhor the symbol of my proud station, which is upon my head in the days of my splendor. So she's saying that she's not even taking heed of the pride and the riches of being queen. I abhor it as minstrel's cloth, and I wear it not in the days of my tranquility. And thy handmaid has not eaten at the table of Haman, and I have not honored the banquet of the king. Neither have I drunk wine of libations. Neither has thy handmaid rejoiced since the day of my promotion until now, except in thee, O Adon Elohim of Abraham. Our Elohim, who has power over all, hearken to the voice of the desperate, and deliver us from the hand of them that devise mischief, and deliver me from my fear. Woo! What a prayer. What a prayer. And we're going to see this come to pass, that she prayed for the Most High to soften the heart of the king, as we just read. Put harmonious speech into my mouth before the lion, and turn his heart to hate him that fights against us. We're going to see that the Most High indeed answers this prayer that we just read from Mordecai and Esther in chapter 4. All right, things are getting good. Let's get into it now. Esther is going to go into the king in chapter 5.
Esther 5. Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him.
All right, we're going to pause there. Got some added in understanding here that the Most High's hand is in all of this. So let's go to the Septuagint. And we see we have verse 1 here, but we also have verse 1a to 1f. All of this is not in the Masoretic. So let's read. And it came to pass on the third day, so the third day after the fast, when she had ceased praying, that she put off her mean dress and put on her glorious apparel. All right, so all we're about to read the rest of this paragraph. And being splendidly arrayed, and having called upon Elohim, the overseer and preserver of all things, she took her two maids, and she leaned upon one as a delicate female, and the other followed bearing her train. And she was blooming in the perfection of her beauty, and her face was cheerful, as it were benevolent, but her heart was straitened for fear. And having passed through all the doors, she stood before the king, and he was sitting upon his royal throne. And he had put on all his glorious apparel, covered all over with gold and precious stones, and was very terrible. And having raised his face resplendent with glory, he looked with intense anger, and the queen fell and changed her color as she fainted. And she bowed herself upon the head of the maid that went before her. But Elohim changed the spirit of the king to gentleness. In intense feeling, he sprang from off his throne and took her into his arms until she recovered. And he comforted her with peaceable words, and said to her, What is this? What is the matter, Esther? I am thy brother. Be of good cheer. Thou shalt not die, for our command is openly declared to thee. Draw 9. Woo! This one just makes it so clear. This in the Masoretic, it just pretty much says that the king accepts her. Right here, it shows that the prayer that we just got done reading at the end of chapter 4 was answered, because immediately the king was angered. But the Most High has his hand on Esther at this moment. So, wow. All right. So now Esther requests for a banquet. Let's continue at verse 5.
Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless Haman refrained himself. And when he came home, he sent and called for his friends, and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches, and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman said moreover, Yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself, and tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, Let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made.
All right. Pretty straightforward chapter. This is the setup for Haman when Esther requests a banquet with him and the king. And now we see Haman is just so distraught about Mordecai that he's like, set up gallows. We're going to try to get that man hanged ASAP. So let's just, what does a gallows look like? That's what, probably seen this on, I don't know, like plenty of old school movies like Robin Hood or something like that. And that is what Haman have set up for Mordecai and other Jews. And that is chapter 5. Chapter 6.
Esther 6. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, There is nothing done for him.
All right. Now it's coming full circle from our introduction of the 2 chamberlains being convicted of conspiracy against the king. But we're going to look at the Septuagint, and I'm going to refer back to the introduction as well, just so we're puzzle piecing everything. So in the chapter of 5 we're in chapter 6 of Esther. On that night could not the king sleep. This is the Most High's hand keeping the king up. And that's why I'm like, they took so much of the Most High out of the book of Esther, because we see, but the Lord, the Adon, the Most High, removed sleep from the king that night. The Most High's hand is on everything. On that night could not the king sleep. Very different than, but the Adon removed sleep from the king that night. And he told his servant to bring in the books, the registers of daily events, to read to him. Very big difference. And then going back to verse 1 here, and it talked about, so the vision that Mordecai had wasn't based on these two chamberlains. It was based on the whole thing of this day of Purim, that Haman was going to try to genocide his people. But that vision caused him to be in the right place at the right time, which was going to put a stop to the bad part of that vision. And as I stated at the beginning, and the king wrote these things for a memorial, which is what we just read now, the memorial, the book of the records of the chronicles of the king. Also, Mordecai wrote concerning these matters, and the king commanded Mordecai to attend in the palace and gave him gifts for this service. This is what's happening right now. What I was saying, this hasn't happened yet. This is about to happen right now. So let's continue. Verse 4.
And the king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house, to speak unto the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servants said unto him, Behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in. And the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to honor more than to myself? And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, Make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate, that nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning, and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife, and all his friends, everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men, and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared.
Woo, we see the Most High working here. Right when Haman came home to his wife and friends, and they come to the conclusion that Mordecai is going to be a problem if these are the people that you're trying to execute. They don't even have time to plan. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hastened to bring Haman unto the banquet. Doesn't even have time to assess what's happening because the Most High's in action now. It's too late for you, Haman. And that is chapter 6. All right. So here it all comes to crashing down on him in chapter 7.
Esther 7. So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he? And where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine, in his wrath went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, Behold also the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, Hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified.
Woo! Amazing. A curse into a blessing. And more, why we read of the prayers. Let me see. In chapter 4, I mean, this the Most High answering the prayer in real time now. And let me see. 17s. Harmonious speech into my mouth before the lion, and turn his heart to hate him, Haman, that fights against us, to the utter destruction of him, which is death, and of them that consent with him. But deliver us by thy hand, and help me who am destitute. And we see, and all throughout the Torah and the prophets, he says, with a mighty hand I have brought you out of Egypt. There's nothing new under the sun with our Elohim and Creator. And that is chapter 7. All right. Chapter 8 of Esther.
Esther 8. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet. and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the things seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews, which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is, the month Sivan, on the 23 day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies and rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts, on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people in province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely, upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. And the decree was given at Shushan, the palace.
All right, so we know, oh yeah, let me see. Does it say the date? I don't think. Let me see. Yeah, verse 9. That is the mid-year. What is Sivan? Third month. Okay. We have the 3rd month. So 3 months, a little bit more than 3 months later, on a 23rd day, they rewrite the letter, reversing everything that they wrote in the 1st month, but clearly stating that you're still going to have to fight for your lives because your enemies are going to hold tight, hold fast to that first letter. And in the 3rd month, they rewrote it, reversing everything that was written in the first letter. All right. And once again, all of this is going to happen on the 13th, or for whatever reason, Septuagint has 14th day of the 12th month. And this letter, a copy of this letter is in the Septuagint. So let's read it. And the following is the copy of the letter of the orders. The great king Artaxerxes Ahasuerus sends greetings to the rulers of the provinces in 127 satrapies from India to Ethiopia, even to those who are faithful to our interests, many who have been frequently honored by the most abundant kindness of their benefactors, have conceived ambitious designs, and not only in endeavor to hurt our subjects, but moreover, not being able to bear prosperity, they also endeavor to plot against their own benefactors. And they not only would utterly abolish gratitude from among men, but also elated by the boastings of men who are strangers to all that is good. They oppose that they shall escape the sin-hating vengeance of the ever-seeing Elohim, and oftentimes evil exhortation has made partakers of the guilt of shedding innocent blood, and has involved in made memorable calamities many of those who were appointed to offices of authority, who had been entrusted with the management of their friends' affairs, while men by false history of an evil disposition have deceived the simple condor of the ruler powers, and it is possible to see this not so much from more ancient traditionary accounts, as it is immediately in their power to see it by examining what things have been wickedly perpetuated by the baseness of men unworthily holding power. And it is right to take heed with regard to the future, that we may maintain the government in undisturbed peace for all men, adopting needful changes and ever judging those cases which come under our notice, with truly equitable decision. Where is this at? Okay, all the way here. Whereas Haman, in reality an alien from the blood of the Persians, differing widely from our mild course of government, having been hospitable, entertained by us, obtained so large a share of our universal kindness as to be called our father, and to continue the person next to the royal throne. Reverence of all, he, however, overcome by the pride of his station, endeavored to deprive us of our dominion in our life, having by various and subtle artifices demanded for destruction both Mordecai, our deliverer and perpetual benefactor, and Esther, the blameless consort of our kingdom, with their whole nation. For by these methods he thought, having surprised us in a defenseless state, to transfer the dominion of the Persians to the Macedonians, but he find that the Jews, who have been consigned to destruction by the most abominable men of men, are not malefactors, but living according to the justice laws, and being the sons of the living Elohim, the Most High and Mighty, who maintains the kingdom to us as well as to our forefathers in the most excellent order. Ye will therefore do well in refusing to obey the letters sent by Haman, because he that has done these things have been hanged with his whole family at the gates of Susa. Actually, I don't think this has happened just yet, but it's about to happen, that the rest of his family is going to be hanged. Almighty Elohim, having swiftly returned to him a worthy recompense, he enjoined you then, having openly published a copy of this letter in every place, to give the Jews permission to use their own lawful customs, and to strengthen them, that on the 13th of the 12th month, Adar, on the self-same day, they may defend themselves against those who attacked them in a time of affliction. For in the place of the destruction of the chosen race, Almighty Elohim has granted them this time of gladness. Do ye therefore also among your notable feasts keep a distinct day with all festivities, that both now and hereafter it may be a day of deliverance to us and those who are well disposed towards the Persians, but to those that plotted against us a memorial of destruction in every city and province collectively, which shall not do accordingly, shall be consumed with vengeance by the spear and fire. It shall be made not only accessible to men, but also most hateful to wild beasts and birds forever. In the letter, and let the copies be posted. No, we're go. Let me go back over now. Where do we stop at? So we're at verse 13 here. Is that where we're at?
And Mordecai.
Okay, yeah, we read all of this already. In the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given. Okay. Whoa, that was a long letter. All right. And so we're finishing off the chapter now, verse 15.
Went out in the presence of the king, in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light, and gladness, and joy, and honor. And in every province, and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them.
All right, so we see right here, after all of that was said and done, that the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. How can you become a Jew? Well, you can be grafted in. Nothing's, and that's the thing. This is the Old Testament, right? This is the Old Testament. So many people think this grafted into Israel is New Testament Romans theology, that is only found in the New Testament. We see Gentiles right here in the book of Esther in the Old Testament being grafted into the house of Judah. Nothing new under the sun. And we see that in one ordinance, Numbers 15, shall be both for you of the congregation, also for the stranger that sojourns with you. One law and one manner shall be for you and for the stranger that sojourns with you. And this is exactly what's happening here. In Isaiah 56:6, the sons of the stranger that join themselves to the Most High to serve him and to love his name, to be his servants, everyone that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and takes hold of my covenant. Over and over again, we see his Gentiles and strangers coming into the fold, and it's all about loving Abba and guarding his Shabbat and commandments. As we see here in the Old Testament, there's nothing new under the sun. All right, chapter 9.
Esther 9. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, of the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people, and all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants and the deputies, and officers of the king, helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. But this man, Mordecai, waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter, and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. And Parishandatha, and Dalphon, and Aspatha, and Poratha, and Adalia, and Aradatha, and Parmashta, and Arisai, and Aradai, and Vajezatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the sons of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, but on the spoil laid they not their hand. On that day the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, The Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done. Then said Esther, If it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree, and that Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the prey they laid not their hand. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together, and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. But they laid not their hands on the prey. On the 13th day of the month Adar, on the 14th day of the same, rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor.
All right, so this is where the days are established of why we're doing them. Obviously, we have the casting of lots, which is what brought it around this time frame. But Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews, and he wants that they should keep the 14th day of the 12th month and the 15th day yearly, because this is the time they rested from their enemies. And how should we rejoice in these times? How should we treat this memorial? Because this isn't a Moedim. This isn't an appointed time sanctified by the Most High. This is a memorial, just like Feast of Dedication, aka Hanukkah. It is a memorial of his people being delivered that we should remember. And it gives us encouragement. I don't know about y'all, but those two stories, Feast of Dedication, found in the book of Maccabees, and Purim, right here in Esther, they really do help uplift you, because these two stories, these memorials, are times where his people are fighting to be delivered. And I think all of us have certain times in our lives that we're going through just that. So it's very encouraging to read these stories as memorials, and that on this time that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and sending portions to one another and gifts to the poor. So taking care of one another with gladness is how this day should be treated and celebrated. All right. Believe, yeah, stopped at verse 23. Wait a minute. No. Let's keep reading. 23.
And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them, and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained, and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed.
All right. So this is just rounding out the whole purpose of this day, from turning device against to destroy against his people to a day of joy and gladness of deliverance on the 14th and 15th day every year in the 12th month. And that even the name, it gives all of this in these few verses of Purim after the name of Pur, which we touched on earlier, that Pur means lot, and that is how the day was chosen. Drawing lots is allowing the Most High to decide, and that's exactly what this is named after. The Most High picked the day that Haman was going to execute them, and just so he could turn it from sadness into happiness. And that's the base of it. The name Purim is derived from the word pur. Purim is plural, which means lot, to draw a lot, because of the lots that Haman drew to determine the day of the Jews' destruction, which we read in chapter 3, verse 7. All right. Verse 29.
Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book.
And then, wait a second. I don't know. I had a note to read it. I don't know if it added anything in verse 26 to 28 in the Septuagint. Let me see. I don't think it added anything. Let me see. All right, no. So what I want to touch on is verse 31. To confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. So some little written a little different in verse 31 here, Septuagint. We read, and Mordecai and Esther the queen appointed a fast for themselves privately, even at that time, also having formed their plan against their own health. I don't know why it's written against their own health. I'm not 100% sure what that's supposed to mean. But even at this time that they're writing this letter, that Mordecai and Esther had a fast for themselves privately. And that's what a lot of this is about. The purpose of the reason this story was written for us and why we're reading it is to show us how we use scripture in times of trial. It's one thing to just be like reading instructions. This is an example of how the instructions are played out in real time. You fast privately. If it's not a community fast, there it's a real thing to do things as a community, but outside of these community fasts, fast privately. And Abba will answer that call as we read throughout the book of Esther. And the last chapter, very short, chapter 10. Let's finish the book of Esther.
Esther 10. And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land, and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed.
Mordecai's position as well reminds me of Joseph in Egypt, right? Second to Pharaoh. But we have, before we're done, the Septuagint comes through once again with much more detail to how we're going to finish this book with 3a. We're going to read 3a, well, Esther chapter 10, 3a to 3k. And Mordecai said, "These things have been done of Elohim, for I remember the dream which I had concerning these matters, for not one, particular of them has failed. There was the little fountain, which became a river, and there was light in the sun and much water. The river is Esther, whom the king married and made queen. And the two serpents are I and Haman. And the nations are those nations that combine to destroy the name of the Jews. But as for my nation, this is Yasharallah, even they that cried to Elohim and were delivered. For the Adon delivered his people, and the Adon rescued us out of all these calamities. And Elohim wrought such signs and great wonders as have not been done among the nations. Therefore did he ordain 2 lots, one for the people of Elohim and one for all the other nations. And these 2 lots came for an appointed season and for a day of judgment before Elohim and for all the nations. And Elohim remembered his people and vindicated his inheritance. And they shall observe these days in the month Adar, 12th month, on the 14th and on the 15th day of the month, with an assembly and joy and gladness before Elohim throughout the generations forever among his people." And that concludes your Purim study and Book of Esther reading. Thank y'all for joining me once again. Happy Purim and Shabbat Shalom. Today or tomorrow, I pray that you feast, you gather, and you rejoice in his name. Shalom.